watching an excellent podcast by Jason Brashears of Archaics fame, and it was about it's a series about the tiny house, about the Exodus people, more commonly known as the Jews, and their various machinations down throughout history. And he made an excellent point, as he so often does. He was stating how, regardless of which calendrical system you use, the timelines all work out perfectly. And he says, the calendrics do not lie, which is an excellent point, because some people will claim that we've got 1,000 years of unaccounted for history. But like he says, it's not the calendrics do account for that time. It's the history that's missing. It's not the time that's missing. Because whether you look at the Mayan calendar, the Papal View calendar, whichever calendar you look at, they all synchronise in such a way as he is able to lay it all out and demonstrate exactly what he means. And on that subject of calendrics, Jason Brashears brought my attention to the fact that we are likely in a simulacrum, a mathematically constructed divine realm of infinite possibilities and magic, you could say. And 40 years ago this summer, I'd just finished my degree in English literature at Nottingham University, and the world was my oyster, so to speak. But it was also the 1986 World Cup, and I was still quite a young fellow, or easily impressed fellow at that point. Given that the current World Cup is being held in Mexico, the United States and Canada, it seems appropriate that I go back to this subject and I put it into the context of these calendrics, because I think it's got I'm just ruminating over the timeless quality of life, really. That really, I'm talking about calendrics, but ultimately, is there such a thing as time? Are we actually not just in a timeless realm, and that the calendars are only used as a form of remembrance of events, to mark certain events that occur? Anyway, I'm just reminiscing here, and I know that some of you will appreciate this because you're of the same vintage as me. And if I look back to 1986, I was living in Lenton in Nottingham with 3 other male friends, and I must admit, we're having a great time. There was Mark, Andy Wilkinson, or Wilco, Paul and myself in this house. And of course we were doing our final for our various degrees. Well, 3 of us were on the same English course. And I didn't go, but at the time there was Glastonbury, there was the World Cup, there was the fact that we were all graduating. And another memorable event that summer was an interrailing experience I had with my then girlfriend Kathy. We got I can't even remember how much it was, we got a month's ticket to travel around Europe wheresoever we wanted. And I think it was it must have been a good deal. It couldn't have been much more than £100 if it was that. And we took a tent with us and we travelled all around Europe, visiting such places as Paris, Nice, the Italian Riviera, Rome, Venice, Switzerland, the Rhineland, the Black Forest, Amsterdam, Bruges, before eventually making our way back home, having started at Stoke-on-Trent, which is where she was from. And I was 21 at the time, and I suppose, even though I didn't have a definitive idea as to what kind of job I was going to go for, it was a great time. It was just the world was my oyster, as they say. Oh, and I can remember in that summer going to see the House Martins playing at Rock City, and it was a very playful time, so to speak. Anyway, so there was this comment from Jason Brashears about how the calendrics do not lie, about how it all fits together with mathematical precision, as you would expect it to, all the different calendars. It came up on my Twitter feed. I saw this, remember in the previous roadcast, I was spouting on about how really I would have been cheering on Norway in their World Cup tie against England, on the grounds that they were, pretty much still are, a distinctly Northern European team with hardly any Africans in the side, whereas England is a captured operation and has a team full of Africans and young men whose Jamaican fathers all fucked off at an early age, leaving them to be brought up by their English mothers. Anyway, you will know by now that Norway were unsuccessful and they lost 2-1. And I didn't watch the game. I've no interest in it beyond just a sort of passing interest. Whereas in 1986 I was very interested and I did enjoy it. You know, I can remember watching England against Argentina on the settee at the house in Lenton with my then girlfriend Kathy. And I can remember distinctly Maradona's so-called hand of God, where he fisted the ball past Peter Shilton. And in that sense, you know, all of these moments are rather timeless. They have a, what would you call it? I think timeless. They have a timeless quality because I remember it, I can picture it and visualise it down to the finest detail, the details of the room, the details of that afternoon, the heat. And I suppose in some ways we're having a great summer and it reminds me of that. It just brings it all back to me in the moment. Anyway, it looked like England were rather lucky to get through. I'm not saying it's rigged, but a couple of points I wish to make. First of all, I saw a clip of the England fans singing Hey Jude to the double goal scorer Jude Bellingham, whose dad is white and whose mother is, I think she's from Ghana or something. Anyway, I was then thinking about how much of a Tavistock creation the Beatles were. But whichever way you look at it, you can't get around the fact that whoever it was that was behind the Beatles and whoever wrote their songs, there are some cracking tunes. And I thought, fucking hell, that tune, the tune or the song Hey Jude, thousands of England fans were singing it to him in the stadium. You can't help but be moved by it. You know, the hairs stand up on your arms, on your legs. Anyway, that's an aside, because more significantly than any of that, I saw a tweet which came up on my X feed, and it was basically demonstrating the calendrics, and behind the calendrics, the mathematical synchronicities that exist between certain events and certain occurrences. And I'm going to copy and post a tweet with within the essay this week, because I think it's worth looking at. This bloke was he's effectively been predicting, by working his way through the calendrics, whether it's the number of days, the number of months, number of weeks, etc., working out the mathematical connections between certain events. So he ties the Battle of Stamford Bridge, 1066, when the English defeated the Norwegians or the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, with the various conflicts and not just conflicts but also football matches, games between the two nations, up to and including the current one. And if you look at what he's presenting, you can see how he was successfully able to predict the tie between England and Norway occurring on a very, very specific date, on a very, very specific timeline. And it's this sort of stuff that really connects in quite beautifully with Jason Brashear's assertions and various proofs that we are living in some kind of simulation, or maybe a simulacrum, a copy of a world that exists beyond this one. And from that, he's also extrapolating that the England-Argentina game, which is the semi-final to be played on Wednesday, is also predictable. That if you know the calendrics, you can predict not only the meeting between the two teams, but the outcome. And I know Jason Brashears has a cipher system which basically reads, you program into it all these particular dates between certain events, and you're able to predict the outcome of not just sporting events but other occurrences, whether on a geopolitical level. It's fascinating stuff. So essentially, you know, and people are saying, well, the World Cup is rigged, that FIFA is a corrupt organisation, etc., etc. I wouldn't deny that. But it did occur to me that the so-called controllers of this realm, the overlords, are able to tap into this knowledge of it being a mathematical construct and effectively use it to their advantage. In other words, making sure certain events occur at specific times, at specific points on the calendar, connecting up with various mathematical, what would you call it? It's all suggesting that they're able to program it because they know how it works. They're able to tap into the mathematics and work with it, especially when it comes to symbolism. So if we're talking about, you know, wars, I mean, you could say that, and I've heard it often espoused, that everything is, the world is controlled through symbolism. So when we talk about a battle between Norway and England, it's not necessarily a conflict in a war, as there was in 1066, but also a conflict with, also a symbolic conflict, like a football match. And what's interesting is that he's saying that, remember 1066, there was a Battle of Stamford Bridge, and then which England won, and then there was a Battle of Hastings, which was against the Normans or the French. So he basically lays out the calendrics, the mathematical connections, and there's a few of them, which enable him to predict or anticipate that it will be England versus France in the World Cup final. And that, in and of itself, is fascinating, as I'm sure you'll agree. Anyway, 1986 also saw the release of what I, at the time, and still to, in fact, I've been listening to it this afternoon, 40 years on. It's an album by the Smiths called The Queen Is Dead. The Queen is connected into this timeline as well, regarding England versus Norway, England versus France. Because we're looking at symbols here, you know, the Queen, no matter what or who the Queen was, she is certainly embedded in the symbolism of it all. Just as the current members of the royal household are as well. Anyway, when I listen back to some of the songs from the Queen Is Dead album, it just makes me smile, as much as it made me smile back in 1986. For instance, the song Frankly Mr. Shankly. Frankly Mr. Shankly, since you ask, you are a flatulent pain in the arse. I do not mean to be so rude, but still I must speak frankly, Mr. Shankly. Ah, give us your money. Fame, fame, fatal fame. It can play hideous tricks on the brain. I do not mean to be so rude, but still I must speak frankly, Mr. Shankly. And also, a song maybe from a bit earlier was Rush Home Ruffians. Rush Home Ruffians. And I used to live in Manchester as well. I lived I was at the university when I was doing my teacher training, and it was just up the road from Rush Home. And the song Rush Home Ruffians is people seem to miss the point with Morrissey. They seem to completely be oblivious to the humour and take him far too seriously. So you see, there's something quintessentially English about Stephen Patrick Morrissey. And as I said in a previous roadcast, link below, he is to be celebrated. Irish heart, English blood. That's a wee vignette of what's going on through my head on this day, the 13th of July, 2026. My good friend Richard's 57th birthday. He's been on this planet for some 20-odd thousand days now. He doesn't watch this. He will never see it. But if he were to watch it, I would have to wish him a splendiferous day. He's just had an operation on his knee. He's in recovery. And so there's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of him watching this, but I suppose there's always a chance. I wish you all the best, Richard. and I hope you enjoy the whiskey. Yeah, so in essence, what this has been about is me simply pointing out, or rather having these data points being brought to my attention by a number of different sources. You see, the truth can be approached from different points, from different perspectives. You'll end up at the same place, because the truth is the truth. It's indefatigable. It does not need defending, and it stands loud and proud. So, although I was wrong in my prediction that Norway would beat England, they should have beaten them, you could say, if a certain pass had been made to a certain Viking forward who was clear on goal. The Norwegians would have gone 2-0 up and possibly gone on to win the game. So I'm just looking at it from a calendrical or mathematical perspective. The World Cup is quite interesting. I don't need to watch the games in order to have the interest, in order to follow that interest. But let's see, shall we? It could well be that there's an England versus France final which has echoes of 1066. And whilst the English beat the Norwegians that year, they did lose to the French. Anyway, check out the information, let me know what you think. Whilst we're on the subject of football, as I was watching the clip of the crowd singing Hey Jude to the footballer Jude Bellingham, it zoomed in, or the camera zoomed in, on Sir Cunty Face David Beckham. Now, you may or may not know this, that David Beckham is someone who identifies as being at least half Jewish, and in fact has spoken on a number of occasions about his pride. Doesn't pride come before a fall? His pride at being Jewish through his maternal granddad. And so when I saw, I mean, let's just be clear about this. As far as I'm concerned, David Beckham is a complete and utter bell end. I don't like him. I think he's as thick as pig shit, and I think he's not only in love with the material world, but he's also in love with the shekel. And so when I saw a line stating that David Beckham was a billionaire, it raised a quizzical eyebrow. I thought, fucking hell, surely not. Surely. So I went on Grok just to check and asked it to provide me with a number of sources that substantiate this assertion that he's a billionaire. And lo and behold, it would seem that it's true. He said something about his wife being valued at £700 million, and that what we're looking at here is the joint value of Victoria and David Beckham. Anyway, he's above and beyond all of that about him being Jewish is the fact that he was pushing the deadly serum, the poisonous content of the COVID vaccination program. He was at the forefront of that, telling people to go and get fucking jabbed. So not only is he of the Jewish persuasion, or identifies with the lovers of the shekel, which may account for his unimaginable amounts of wealth. Remember, this guy's just a fucking footballer. He was able to kick a ball with some skill, but that was all. I mean, he can't really articulate more than a few words at any one time. And he, most unforgivably, was pushing the COVID narrative and the poisonous serum. And for me, that makes him an odious creature, above and beyond his love of the shekel and his love for Judaism. I just thought, well, what an absolute cunt. Oh, that's just an opinion. I also find it rather amusing that these days his choice of attire is invariably a three-piece suit with a tie and collar, quite possibly to cover up all the fucking tattoos he's got all over his body. I mean, there's another line from the Smiths. I think it's from the song What She Said. What she said was, I'm hoping for an early death. It took a tattooed boy from Birkenhead to really, really open her eyes. What she said. A tattooed boy from Birkenhead in 1986 was comparatively rare. In 2026, I suspect that most boys from Birkenhead are tattooed. Anyway, on that note, I'll catch you later. Cheers.